I'm not really sure how best to tell this story, so I will post it in small chunks at a time, I guess. I was around 13 or 14 years old at the time. I was walking my dogs on the same route as usual around the village. I always walked down a real long lane that stretched between backyards of opposite houses. Garages and sheds ran along one side, and brick walls ran along the other. Halfway through the lane was an old rundown car with a black little dome thing on the dashboard. Said dome was constantly blinking red, either an alarm or a camera, I imagine. In front of the car was a real dilapidated horse box. The picture I'm showing you right now is not the same one, but very familiar. It was rusted to all hell. It had holes and open areas that were heavily boarded up with wood and sheet metal. Every time I walked down this lane, dogs would constantly run to the horse box and frantically start sniffing around it, and consistently pull back on the leash as I would try to pull them away. I thought nothing of it really at the time, until I noticed other dogs would behave the same way around it, and not just mine. The horse box began to gain my curiosity. I began to take my dogs out more often, just to see if they would eventually lose interest in the horse box. They didn't. If anything, I would say that they got more persistent. They would start dragging me towards it. They would sometimes growl at the box or at me when I would try and pull them away. I decided to try and take a look for myself. I thought it wouldn't hurt. I started circling the box as best as I could, looking for some kind of opening. I noticed a relatively loose piece of wood towards the top of the box, being held in place by a couple of rusty nails. Curiosity got the better of me, and I tried to get a peek inside by pulling the wood just a little. I decided it was probably not the best idea after I heard footsteps coming towards the gate beside the box. I yanked the dogs away and hurried to the end of the lane. It could have been nothing, but I didn't bother looking back. A few days passed by, and I wanted, or rather needed, to take another look. The horse box now had my attention. I started going out with the dogs later in the evening at a quieter time, less likely to be interrupted, I thought. The sun was setting earlier in the day. This was late summer, so days began getting shorter, but I had plenty of daylight to start snooping. So I took the dogs on their walk, the same route, just at a different time. I started coming out towards the lane, but my plans changed when I saw some old man stood directly in front of the horse box, just staring at it. He had a dog with him, and it was the first dog I'd seen which had not gone apeshit when next to said horse box. I thought to myself maybe it was just one big coincidence that every dog I had seen acted the same way. I continued to watch the fella from afar, pretending to pick up some dog shit so that I would look relatively normal if he took a glance at me and saw me hanging around. The old man then began toying with the horse box, touching the wood, adjusting the sheet metal. He stood doing this for a while. Hell, I'm not even sure how long as I was stood there picking up dog shit. After a while, he just stood and stared at it for several more minutes before opening up the gate beside it and walking into his backyard. That makes a whole lot of sense, I thought. That explains why the dog was not showing any interest with the thing. More days passed by, and the summer break was slowly coming to a close. I decided to make it my mission to now find out what was inside of the horse box that got the dogs all spooked before school started again. The sun probably set around 7 p.m., and I decided to go and have another look. I grabbed the flashlight and headed out. I left the dogs at home this time. So, the time had come, I thought. No pussyfooting around it this time. No dogs, no distractions. I come up to the horse box. It never really affected me in any way like it did with the dogs. That's a whole different story when it's dark. There are no street lamps around, and the only light illuminating this piece of junk was my dim flashlight. I actually started feeling a little bit nauseous. I'm still not quite sure whether it was this inanimate object that was causing me to feel this way, or me thinking that maybe I was breaking the law in some way. I decided to nut up and circled the thing, but I could not find the loose wood I had moved about a week or so ago. The old man had clearly made some improvements. There was more nails in the wood, more sheet metal had been applied. Something was in this box that he did not want people to see. His defense had leveled up tenfold. I started thinking to myself that maybe I was not best equipped for such a task, and maybe I would need some tools to get the job done. Those thoughts were quickly diminished when I noticed that an area had been untouched by Tim Allen from Home Improvement. I managed to pull myself up to the open part of the box by positioning myself awkwardly on the wheel arch. I probably should have used a headlamp or something in hindsight, because trying to keep myself balanced, upright, and try and pull myself up to eye level with the open area was a chore with one free hand, flashlight at the ready in the other. Alas, I stabilized myself in a comfortable position and got my light to shine inside. I'm not sure if it was because I was elevated, but some very bizarre smell, which I still to this day cannot put my finger on, suddenly hit me. A stench I'd never smelled before now hit me like a train. I guess this was why the dogs went bananas around the thing. I still could not make out what was inside, so I tried to lift myself up higher. In doing so, I pulled a piece of wood from the box, dropped my flashlight inside, and slipped, so the fall clearly made a whole lot of noise, but not enough to disturb the peace, I'd say. But being the ignorant, set in my ways kind of guy that I am, I completely forgot about the little blinking red light in the car beside the box. I'm pretty sure it was a camera. So I got back up and went for another look. Lo and behold, the footsteps start coming, and they sounded in a hurry. I started to panic and didn't know what to do or where to go, and just kind of froze. The gate behind me swung open, and in an instant, I was now face to face with the guy. He was old, he looked real old, leathery skin, a dirty mustache, deep dark circles underneath his eyes. He did not say a word. He grabbed me by both shoulders and somewhat gently pushed me against the horse box. With my back up against it, I had nowhere to look but straight at him. It didn't even feel as though he was looking at me. I know it sounds cliché, but it did feel like he was looking right through me, like the only thing he could see was the horse box. He stood like this for several seconds before pulling out some kind of disposable camera and taking a snapshot of what must have been a very pale face of mine. He then fixed his focus to actually look at me and said something along the lines of "silly boy" or "stupid boy," and he shook his head. I'm pretty sure he went to say something else as he looked at his disposable camera, but I decided I was not in the mood to make small talk, and I licked it back down the lane, back the way I came. Fair to say I did not want to get back to this lane, and I avoided it religiously for several months. Just after Christmas, I decided to take an early morning walk down the lane, just to see if Tim Allen had made any more improvements. The horse box was nowhere to be seen, and neither was the car with the camera/alarm. I felt as though a weight had been lifted off of my chest, knowing this old guy had relocated his creepy junk somewhere else. I still did not like the thought of this guy potentially having a photograph of me lying around somewhere, but the thought of him being out of the area was good enough for me. I never saw the old guy again, nor did I ever see that horse box again, and walking my dogs was far easier without them being constantly distracted by it. Around the end of January, I was taking a walk with a friend to the park, and we took the lane as a shortcut. The entire backyard area of Horsebox House was cornered off with police tape, and several officers were stood around the area. I looked into the yard, and there were men in white hazmat suits walking up and down his garden, and several holes had been dug up along the patch of grass. I don't know where the old man went, and I still to this day don't know what was going on in his backyard, and I don't think I will ever find out. I was 13 years old at the time this happened to me. I was visiting my uncle in a town called Beaumount in Texas, right next to the Gulf and on the border of Louisiana. My uncle owns a large property on the outskirts of town. It's very marshy and isolated. A solid 80% of the property is in dense woods and swamp. I lived in Houston and would visit during the summer for 2 to 4 weeks at a time. We would hunt ducks and fish in the pond behind his house. I loved it there, but never ventured much too far into the woods. A trail ran through it from my uncle's four-wheeler, but he did not even hunt there. For that, we went to his buddy's property, about 5 miles down the old service road he lived off of. When I was 11 years old, I started to ask about the woods beyond his pond. I asked my aunt why they even owned the land if they were not going to use it, because about half of the woods were contained in a plot of land my uncle bought in 2004 or so. She said an old man used to live there, in an old trailer. When he died, my uncle bought his land. Something about protecting the scenery or some bullshit. My uncle did not like to talk about it. He knew me well, so instead of saying not to go in there, he would mention stories of huge gators and snakes that would eat full-grown bucks. He called it the Blackwater because the canopy from the cypress trees were so thick, no light reached the swamp water. When I visited my uncle during one of those summers, I was especially curious about the Blackwater. I had gone into the show Supernatural lately at the time. I kept telling him there could be some cryptid like the Wendigo hiding back there. You won't find a Wendigo down there and on, but you better watch out for them at your Nana's house. She retired and lives in Syracuse. What will you find down there? My uncle paused, then said gators, and then changed the topic. I was going to be there for 3 weeks, so I decided to do a mock-up cryptid investigation of my own. Basically just sitting on the porch with a pen and a paper during the day and taking notes on what I saw and heard. Typical weirdo 13-year-old stuff. I spent about a week just helping out my uncle with chores on his property, weeding out a pesky water moccasin from the pond, cleaning up branches after a storm, etc. One day, my uncle asked me if we want to go and set up some crawdad traps in the bayou that starts towards the eastern edge of his property. He says that we can take the four-wheeler out there. Hell yeah. We loaded up with traps and head out at about 4 a.m. so that we can have some for dinner. It's still dark outside, and the bayou is maybe a 3-minute four-wheeler ride from his house. He brings his dog, Drew, with us. He begins to set up the traps when Drew starts barking at something in the woods. It's in the direction of the Blackwater. My uncle tells the dog to quiet down and tells me it's probably a nutria rat or something. He can tell that I'm nervous though. Those damn Supernatural episodes made me paranoid. The dog is barking into deep scary woods. I know how stereotypical it sounds. And then I heard footsteps and branches breaking. Nothing actually happened though, besides Drew barking. We set up the final traps and head back home. Later in the day, when we go to pick up the traps, Drew does not want to come. Usually, he hops right into the back of the four-wheeler and loves the ride. He completely ignores my uncle. We just brush it off. We pick up the traps with nothing weird happening. There were a shitload of crawdads though. Nice. A few of my older cousins who live in Shreveport come down for food. It's a good old family bash. Everyone gets drunk and we listen to the Astros game while sitting on the porch. It's probably about 10 at this point. My aunt and female cousins have gone inside. Just me and the drunk guys outside. This is when it gets weird. So I had 3 cousins there that night, aged 18, 20, and 23. They are my uncle's kids, and all have work-ish in construction in Shreveport. They know me pretty well, and love to joke around with me, telling me outrageous stories that I believed is true. They told me about a creature that roams the swamp and will eat kids who do not behave. I was a little old for these kinds of stories, and I knew it was some old Cajun legend. They said that one lived in the Blackwater and ate the old man who lived there. I shrug it off and laugh. I thought it was just one of their stories. I keep telling them I know it's not real. They are all very intoxicated and told me to go and look for myself. It's very dark, and I was not a fan of going into the Blackwater, especially after what happened with Drew. They tell me to do it, pussy. My oldest cousin, let's call him Eric, said he was going to take me out there. He staggers inside and comes back with 2 flashlights, a handgun, and 2 Coors Lights. The other guys get uncomfortable and ask Eric if he's really taking me. They're not really as drunk as him. Eric gets angry and in a not-so-audible whisper says, "Don't tell me you pussies believe in those stories." He kinda stumbles towards me and starts to head out to the tree line, beckoning me to come with. I follow. I figure going in with an adult with a handgun is the safest bet possible. My other cousins jokingly say, "Don't die," but something is off. They seem nervous. Part of them thinks it's the alcohol. The other part thinks they're just paranoid, so they do nothing. My cousin takes the lead, and we start down the four-wheeler path into the Blackwater. Somehow it's even darker underneath the canopy. There is no stars, no moonlight. Soon, the hum of the bullfrogs fade away. The lights from my uncle's house disappear. It's quiet in here. Anyone who lives near a swamp knows that the symphony of nocturnal animals does not stop for much. Alcohol had not impaired my cousin enough for him not to notice this. He stands still and pans his flashlight off into the cypress grove that surrounds us. "Wait here, Anon. I'll be right back." Eric heads off, and I wait on the trail. Now I'm starting to get scared. Soon, I can't see his flashlight anymore. I hear footsteps. I call out for Eric. No reply. I turn off my light. I think the bastard is playing a trick on me, trying to scare me. The footsteps get closer and closer. When they seem to be right behind me, I turn on my flashlight and whip around. Big mistake. I illuminate a beast. It's probably around 7 feet tall. It looks like a werewolf that's been decomposing in a bayou for a few days. It has these glowing red eyes. It smells rancid. The body is skinny and covered in blotchy fur. It has this tribal-looking necklace, rather, necklaces, hanging from its neck. It has multiple of them. It has the head of a large coyote, I guess, that was distracted by the eyes. The arms hung down to its lower legs, and the fingers looked like claws. I had all of the air sucked out of my lungs. I was in shock. This thing stared at me and hung its jaw agape. It began to howl, like a wolf drowning. It was ugly and high-pitched and cut through the silence. I then gained enough sense to run. I screamed as I ran. I heard its footsteps behind me. It galloped into a dense patch of trees, but I could still hear it following me. It growled and made horrible noises. It was toying with me. I wanted to stop and just let it get me. I kept turning back to see those eyes. It would break branches and throw things onto the trail. I dropped my flashlight and just ran to where I thought the trail was. Soon, I was running through swampy water. I heard it splashing near me. It felt like hours had passed by when it was nowhere near that amount of time. I saw the moonlight through the trees, and I knew I was almost there. The creature could go silent at will. It would disappear, then pop out next to me just a few moments later. I hated that it was toying with me. It let out another one of those howls. I covered my ears, it was so loud. I then saw the lights from my uncle's house. I broke through the tree line and fell down about 100 feet away from the house. Behind me, the creature stopped where the trees ended. It panted lightly and stared at me with those red eyes. It slipped back into the Blackwater. I heard another howl about a minute later. The guys were still on the porch. They were trying to calm me down. I told them that I saw something. They did not try to argue with me or try and convince me that I was wrong. About 10 minutes later, Eric comes sprinting towards the house without his flashlight or gun. He falls down and promptly throws up several times. I was in shock and actually passed out around this time. When I woke up, I was on my way to the hospital. They said my cousin and I got separated and scared when we heard a coyote. That was it. They told me that anything else was just an illusion. I saw a therapist for a while because the creature would show up in my dreams. My uncle believed me and said not to tell anyone though, because he did not want people to investigate. Said that the woods keep that thing in there, that he owns all of the Blackwater area. He leaves deer in there and such. It's the only reason why the four-wheeler track is in there. He calls the beast a Rougarou, an old Cajun legend. My cousin should have gotten therapy. He was never quite the same after that night. He quit his job about a week later. He went off the grid and never contacted the family ever again. He died of a fentanyl overdose about 2 years later. He was living in a dope house about an hour south of Baton Rouge. I have not gone down to see my uncle since 2015 or so. I moved to Phoenix, and frankly, I do not care for the woods anymore. I still see those eyes sometimes. I can only say one thing for sure though. I am never going back to Beaumont, ever again. Here is a story told to me by a coworker who worked at the same summer camp I did. As far as my knowledge goes, these stories are completely true. These stories all take place around Mount St Helens and Spirit Lake in Washington state. Old native legends talk about a demon that lives near or in the water in Washington called tetsuyaayt. Tetsuyaayt was one of 3 demons who terrorized the land of men. One of the other 2 was named tetsuyaayt and was killed many, many years ago. I never learned the name of the 3rd demon from my coworker. We'll call my coworker Joe. When Joe was 11 years old, he was with his parents at Mount St Helens and was on a tour when he got separated. He wandered around for a while until he realized he was completely lost. Being an outdoorsy child, he had a compass with him and knew which direction the tour started and ended in, and started to make his way in that direction. A little time passed by, and as he was walking, a light fog started to roll in. As time went on, the fog got thicker and thicker until he could no longer make out his feet on the ground or his hands in front of his face. All of a sudden, he saw a clearing in the fog, and in the front of him lay the bank of Spirit Lake. He had heard bad things about this lake, however, and started to back away when he saw something disturb the surface of the water. He's not sure what it was, but he remembers 3 distinct ripples across the surface of the water. He finally found his way to a service road and walked along it until he found a few rangers who drove him back to the tour base. His parents greeted him and asked why he had not responded when they had called him. He never heard them call him, but they swore they saw him in some fog and called to him, but he did not respond. His mother said she had just seen him just off the tour path, but he was near the shore of the lake, a good 11 to 13 miles away. Only 20 minutes later, after he was reunited with his parents, the rangers got a call saying that someone had just drowned in the lake. Joe was later told by a tribesman that the only reason he survived that day was because the other boy died. Years passed by. Joe is now 19 years old and is working with the United States Geological Service, taking pictures of the mountain and taking rock core samples. One summer afternoon, he is camping near the mountain with a larger group of people, and in this group are an older man and his 17-year-old son. Joe and the old man got to talking, and after Joe set up his camera to take pictures of the sunset every 40 seconds on a timer, him and the old man are having a conversation about what happened to Joe near the mountain when he was 11 years old. Throughout the conversation, he hears a constant thunk noise. It's the 17-year-old brat throwing ninja stars at a tree trunk. Joe asked him to stop multiple times, and the old man also told him to stop, but the son did not listen. The sun had just fallen behind the mountain when the fire that had been roaring a few feet high went completely out. A few seconds pass by, and a screaming sound starts up. It sounds like it's miles away up the mountain, but with each second, the scream gets closer. Joe described it as a mix between nails on a chalkboard, a rusted door opening, and the throaty growl of a wolf. The scream got closer and louder, and Joe noticed the closer the scream got, the tops of the trees would bend and bend until the scream came right up to the group's campsite, and all of the trees around them were bent, so the tops were perpendicular with the ground. The screams at this point seemed to come from all around them, and Joe realized that his ears heard no noise. The scream was now only in his mind, echoing around his head. Joe ran. He grabbed his camera and ran to his car, got in, and took off. The scream followed him down the road, but he noticed the farther he got from the campsite, the quieter the scream got until he heard it no longer. He had a friend who lived in a nearby town and went to stay there for the night. When he arrived, his friend was glad to see him and almost let him in, but his mother stopped him. She screamed when she saw him and slammed the door in his face. She had native roots and was a very spiritual woman. After several attempts to get Joe to leave, she finally opened up the door a crack and told him that he was surrounded with a negative energy, and told him that the only way he was ever setting foot inside her house was if she smudged him first. Smudging is something done involving a special herb being burnt and rubbed on the body from head to foot to cleanse and purify someone. Finally, she let him in and asked him to tell her what happened. Once he was done recounting his tale, she told him that he must go back in the morning and revisit the site. So in the morning, he returned to find the other campers rapidly packing up. The old man was just putting the last of his things in his car when Joe pulled up. The old man asked why in the world would Joe come back. Joe said he had only been scared and that it must have been his imagination. The old man shook his head and called over his son who had been throwing the stars. He told him to show something to Joe, and he did. The son pulled off his shirt and turned around, and on his back were 3 deep gashes from his shoulders down to his lower back. They were at least an inch thick each and perfectly cauterized. No living animal has claws that big or that can cauterize a wound. Joe quickly collected all his things that he had left at the campsite and left. About a week later, the USGS asked for the pictures of the sunset he took that night, and when he developed the photos, he found something that scared the living daylights out of him. 3 pictures, all taken within 90 seconds. The first one shows the fire at full blaze with the mountain in the background. The second shows the fire completely out with a large black-shaped silhouetted against the dark gray of the rest of the photo. The third shows the fire ablaze again, and reflected in the firelight were 2 gigantic eyes and a huge jaw full of teeth. I have seen this photo, but I regret that I do not have copies. The third photo was also placed under infrared light to check for any falsification. Under that light, 2 sets of 3 claws are clearly visible against the ground. Fast forward just 2 years, Joe still works for the USGS, taking pictures around the mountain. Nothing eventful has happened since the incident 2 years prior. It's in the back of Joe's mind. He's asked to take pictures of the mountain again at night during an almost full moon. This is something he really enjoys doing, so he gladly accepts. He sets up his tent and readies his camera for the pictures. Around 10 p.m., he leaves his tent and walks around and takes pictures. He notices some weird fog over the lake, a thick blanket with an unusual tuft of fog near the middle. He knew this would make a fantastic picture, so he hikes towards the lake. He took 2 pictures when all of a sudden, a very, very powerful wind starts to blow, making it hard for him to stand up. He estimated the wind speed to be about 70 miles per hour. He somehow manages to get back to his tent, and right when he gets to it, the wind dies. He climbs inside and readies himself for the night and falls asleep. Around 11 p.m., he wakes up in a cold sweat. He has goosebumps and every hair is standing on end, and as he watches, 3 little points appear on the wall of his tent, pointing in, right at him. Slowly, they push until there is a clear impression of 3 giant claws. Suddenly, they disappear. Joe is clearly frightened, but assumes the worst is over. Then he hears the zipper of his tent slowly start to open. He jumped about 6 inches in the air and grabbed the inside zipper. He wrestled the invisible force for about 10 minutes until it finally stopped struggling against him, and he was able to grab his padlock and lock the zipper shut. Assuming that had to be the end of it, he climbed back into his sleeping bag and went to sleep. Around midnight, he woke up again. An unnatural stillness had taken place, and once again, his hair was standing on end. In an instant, the poles of his tent collapsed, and he felt something huge and solid press down on him from above, cutting off his air supply. He blacked out from lack of oxygen and woke up the next day with the tent poles set back up. He went back to his friend's house and was once again smudged by the mother and asked to recount his tale. When he described the location of the tent, the mother clicked her tongue disapprovingly and shook her head. She told him that he had set up his tent near the mouth of the Norway-Sweden mine. The story of the Norway-Sweden mine was told to him by the woman, and he told it to me. When the mine was first started, it was a very, very successful copper mine, and everything ran smoothly for a while. Then one day, the miners did not return home. 3 days passed by without a single one of the miners being seen. The owner of the mine went to see what was going on because he was dumbfounded. All the machinery was running, but not a single miner was to be seen. He finally found all of the miners in the very deepest portion of the mine. Every single one of them was dead and stacked in neat piles. Word got out about a mass murderer, but no one was ever caught. Because the mine was so profitable, a crew of new miners was hired and the mine was reopened. Everything went well for 2 weeks until again, all of the miners did not return home. The owner went to investigate for a second time and again found all the machinery running and all of the miners dead in piles deep in the mine. This time, they had been beheaded with the heads nowhere to be seen. But once again, money ruled and a third group of miners was hired. Only 1 week passed by before they did not return home. The machinery had all been left on and running, but now there were deep gashes and scratches all around the mine in sets of 3. The miners were found completely dismembered, every limb pulled apart, and once again, every head missing. The mine was then shut down for good. Joe has never returned to the mountain, but he has visited several reservations and asked about the demon Siako. Some tribes kicked him out just for speaking the name, for saying the name near large bodies of water is said to draw the spirit near. Other groups told him more stories, of which he has 57, and I cannot for the life of me remember them well enough to recount them. It has been described as an enormous being with big red eyes, a giant mouthful of teeth bigger than arrowheads, and 2 long arms ending in a hand with 3 long, sharp and monstrous claws. These stories were told to me by Joe at the camp that we worked at together this summer. The camp is on an island, completely surrounded by water, but he swore we were far enough away from the mountain to be safe saying the name. 2 nights after being told these stories for the first time, I was on an overnight at the Heaven campsite at the camp. Overnights are a night where the kids sleep, eat, and cook outside for a night instead of being in a cabin. The Heaven campsite was not named for a religious affiliation. After the kids went to bed, me and the 2 other staff members put the fire out completely and went to sleep. I woke up a few hours later and saw someone silhouetted against the now roaring fire. I assumed it was one of the other staff members and went back to sleep. In the morning, I asked the other 2, and they saw the same thing at one point during the night, but both had assumed, like me, that it was a staff member who had lit the fire. None of the wood that we brought was used for the fire, and there were marks in the ashes that had not been there the night before. 6 lines in the ashes in sets of 3, a few feet apart. The campsite is at least a mile away from the main camp, 3 miles away from the next closest settlement, and lies directly overlooking the sea. We told our camp director, and an investigation was made. No trace of another human being other than the 3 staff and 13 campers was found. That campsite was off limits for the rest of the summer, and that is the end of my story.